Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Dad Schooling Podcast. I'm your host, Fatherhood Reforged, and today we have an epic guest, Matt Beaudreau. How you doing, man?
Doing great, brother. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you. Sorry again for being a couple minutes late. That was timing issues
No,
on our side, man. 100% our fault.
no worries at all. I'd introduce you, but I think you should introduce yourself. And
Sure.
I, go ahead.
Yeah, glad to do it, man. So, first and foremost, father and husband. That is the most important role that I play, bar none. After that, I tell people I'm an educator, a career educator. People hear that and they think schools, but then I'm quick to say, hey, schooling and education are not the same thing, and oftentimes they're diametrically opposed. And so when I say educator,
Amen.
I'm here to get people curious. I'm here to get people to ask questions. I'm here to get people to sometimes get annoyed and kind of agitated. All the things a good educator I think is supposed to do, because ultimately I want people to be curious, and I want them to be curious on how do I optimize things for myself, my family, my kids, and get to a place of what I define as the goal of education. Um, Defining your own sovereignty. As Seth Godin asked me a long
Mm.
time ago, what should education be for? Sovereignty and freedom is as far as I can see it. And I want people to understand how to obtain that and however they define it. So all of my work is around that. I've been in education in any position you can think of for a number of years, worked with clients all over the world from a corporate standpoint, and now we're helping families to understand how to really be educated, be sovereign, be free.
Mm.
We're doing it through our mentorship programs and our physical campuses. So 7 days a week, never hurting for something to do.
Yep. I love the two words you just used then, education and sovereignty, and linking the two because I will, and it's a hill I'll die on. I fully believe that, to the point you made earlier, the schooling and education, the public school system that does
Mm,
not teach sovereignty. And that
at
that
all.
is something I will preach till the day I die. It is not designed to make sovereign individuals. That's not the
No,
way it was ever developed.
it's a behavioral management system. Like that's all it is. That's all it was designed to be. And the founders of that specific system were very clear that that's what it was designed to be.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Openly.
yeah, very openly. So it just, that's we don't question it because again, we've been trained not to be curious. We don't question it as a society, and we don't dive in because, well, we grew up in that and our parents grew up in that. And so we essentially have a religious system on our hands, and
Mm.
people don't like to question their religions, right? And that's it. And so that's part of my job is to go, hey, where did this come from in the first place? Why do we do the things we do? Why do we do it this way? Where did it come from? I didn't create the design. People get mad at me for saying, where did it come from? I didn't
Yeah.
create it. It's my choice. I'm just pointing people to the fact that that's what it was created for, was to manage behaviors of large populations, get them ready for compliance and obedience in an industrial revolution. I mean, that's really what it was. And it still works. It's just not
Yeah.
what it's just not what's going to lead you to sovereignty and freedom.
Yeah.
And it's provable. And I can walk people through that from an intellectual perspective. Emotionally, they're still so attached to the
Yeah.
religion
Yeah.
of what school looks like that's where it gets difficult, which I understand,
Mm. I think there's a huge nostalgia element to that as well, though.
of course.
We have the whole, maybe when public school had less of a malign agenda, if we
Sure.
can call it that.
Sure.
You had the summers, and you had, I think it's just, and media plays a huge part in showing all those,
Of course.
trying to, those fond school memories, and
Of
the
course.
sports victories and all
Sports
those that
and the
yeah,
proms and
yeah,
all 100%. I get it. I get the nostalgic factor. I had a great time in school. I had a great time growing up in school because I knew how to play the game.
yeah.
So I didn't have to try hard to get straight A's. That was easy just because I figured out the game, not because I'm that smart, but I just figured out the game of schooling and how to do it well. So I got great grades. I was a good athlete, so I had a good time on the sports side, and I made friends, and I did fine with girls, and that was the focus, right? Was the girls and sports, and so
Sure.
everything was right. So it was great. So I had a great time, and then I graduated, and the world didn't care.
Nope.
The world didn't care that I had straight
Big
A's. The
shock.
world didn't care that I could talk to girls in high school. The girls did not, or the world did not care about any of those things. So I went, shoot, now what? Because I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't even know
Mm.
what to do. I don't know what to do next. I have no idea. Right? So what do you go to college because everybody else goes to
Yeah.
college. And it's the same thing. Now I just come out with my straight A's, better at sports, better at girls, and in debt. Cool. Now what? Now what do I
Yep.
do? Because now I'm 22 and have to figure this out. It's the same thing, man. And so I get it. I get the whole nostalgia thing. I do. But also I get that my kids and their futures are so much more important than feeling good in the short term.
Yeah.
They got to go to a fun prom. And by the way, when I look back on what prom was, it wasn't anything that I'm proud of, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
It's like I can't do that, man. I can't sacrifice my kids for stuff like that.
No. No. That's a really good point. And there was something you touched on. I think that's the whole going through school and into college. I think that's a huge proponent in why we have such issues with the college system today. The extortionate amount of fees they're charging,
Totally.
the indoctrination that they push, the
Mhm.
useless courses that they're championing today, because so many kids are taught how to do school well, but not
Yep.
life well. So when you graduate high school, you've got a choice of doing more school or
Right.
life.
Right. That's
Which, as
exactly
you
right.
said, which one are you really good at? Which one's safe? Which one's comfortable?
That's the
Which
thing.
one makes a lot more sense because you know it so well? Well, you're going to go do that, regardless of what course you're actually doing, whether it's social injustice equalities or whatever, or whether
Doesn't
you're
matter.
training to be a doctor, because those are two very different requirements.
They're very different things. They're very different things. And even people train into, because I get this all the time too. It's because you talk to people about the difference of what you just said, life and school, right? They're not the same game. It's like me saying, well, I'm really good at basketball, so I'm automatically good at football. No, you're not. It's not the same just
Mm.
because they have a ball and there's a team element and there's rules. So it's the same, right? No, it's a completely different game. One does not mean you're good at the other. Right. And so you could be potentially good at both, but it doesn't, one is not training you for the other. There's a small amount of things that cross over. Great. Maybe I have decent footwork. Maybe there's a small amount of things, but they're not the same. Imagine if you actually trained learning how to play football that entire time and then went to play
Mhm.
football. That's a vastly different deal. So I tell parents that, I mean, that's exactly it. So I don't want you to train to be good at school and then step into life and go, well, here's a very small percentage of crossover. No, let's get you good at the things that life demands. And let's get you understanding who you are and what you're good at naturally and what you're excited about. Like, let's do those things, and then transfer over from there. And what you said too is, um, talking about college, people assume the whole K through 12 program is essentially just the end goal is just getting everybody into college, which is a horrible goal.
Mhm.
Uh, but what I will inevitably get from parents is, well, what if my child wants to be a doctor? What if they want to be an engineer? Right. And the first thing I always say is, well, do they? Because most of
Yeah.
the time, parents that are saying that, their kids don't want to be that. They're just saying it to justify for themselves
Yeah.
emotionally why this makes sense. But okay, yeah, let's say they do want to be a doctor. Awesome. I still argue that their child, if they know for a fact that they want to be a doctor, then he or she should not be required to pay an exorbitant amount of money to go take a bunch of other courses that don't prepare them to go to med school and do the things they want
Yeah.
to do, but they still do. They still have to waste a whole lot of time and money, and that's pretty dang inefficient. And I think there's more efficient ways to do that. Apprenticeships. There's a lot of things we could talk about as far as solutions, but the solutions don't matter when you got a population that's not wanting solutions. They're
No.
nostalgic of the way it's always been.
Yep. It's nostalgia. It's safety. It's one less thing to worry about when it comes to your kids because that thing's taken care of. So it's like sort of what is it? The decision burden.
Mm-hmm.
The people will talk about having the same meal every day for lunch because it strips that decision from you. So you're not,
Mm-hmm.
it's one less thing to think about. But obviously,
Right.
educational choice is a hugely more important and bigger than what you have for lunch every day. But it's the same sort of concept on a grander scale.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
100%.
do you think, here's a question then, do you think it's an active mispreparation for life, or do you think it's just a passive effect of the school system? Because
Yes.
people will say, yeah, great answer. No,
Yes.
people will say, public school is terrible. Public school is crap. But, and I completely agree with that point, and it's a similar yes answer. But public school is very good, actually, at doing what it was designed to do.
Right.
It's just creating a nation of free thinkers and critical thinkers and children who are fulfilled in their education and realize that learning is necessary for growth. That's not their goal.
Right. That's exactly right. So there's intentionality behind that. Again, the design was a behavioral management system. It's designed for
Mm.
obedience, it's designed for compliance, it's designed for a very specific standardized product of human who will, just listen to directions, who will seek out, of whoever the faux authority is and listen to what they need to do next, and not take the reins and take the pen back and write their own story and take the reins to to build their own life. That's intentionally what it is. And then there's the byproducts of being in a system designed for that. Yeah, the byproduct becomes apathy. The byproduct
Mhm.
becomes a confusion where you think that you don't actually like to learn, when the
Yeah.
reality is that's a factory setting of a human being. That's you come out curious. Well, we
Yeah.
kill the curiosity, we suck it out of you, we train it out of you early. So there's intentionality, and then there's the byproducts that just kind of happen to stem from that intentionality. So yeah, it's a yes and.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. And it's that point you just made about the learning, the attitude towards learning. Learning really is a chore when you go
Mhm.
to school, because it's not fun. You're sitting in the same room. You're learning, or you're being taught one way by one person, one fact. And you're
Yeah.
right. You take a look at your children before they go to school, and they're curious about everything. The world amazes them, and
Mhm.
they want to absorb it all. And there's the whole stereotype of the annoying child that's always why. But that's
Yeah,
because that's just a side effect of how curious they are about wanting to know everything about the world.
you bet.
And
That's
you
it.
think about how much growth is involved in that period before they enter school because they're learning so much. And that
Mhm.
growth is, learning is necessary for growth, but we don't teach that message. That's not the message we put out there. The message is learning is a chore.
That's right. And then what gets defined as learning as soon as you get to school is only something related to passive academic, acquisition. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? Sitting there having a quote unquote expert barf something at you, you have to put it in your head and make sure you can regurgitate it as well. And that's
Yep.
what we start to confuse with learning. Those are
Hmm.
not the same thing, right? That
Absolutely.
game of passivity is not learning. They're learning just as much when they're out, running around in play and recess and navigating social
Hmm.
relationships. I mean, they're learning through that. I learned how to play the game. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
learned that more than I learned anything else in school. I got straight A's and I still can't pass a state. I mean, I couldn't pass anything. You give me something like trigonometry or something, I'm not gonna pass it. I have no idea how to do any of that, but I got an A in it when I did it, right? Because I learned to play the game. So we
Yeah. Yeah.
confuse what we're doing there with learning, and
Absolutely.
that's one of the things that's our biggest detriment is that parents have started to, even when they a lot of times will start homeschooling, they're like, but the quote unquote experts say my child needs to do this academic work at this
Hmm.
time. And so then they try to recreate that at home too, and they stifle learning at home too because
Oh,
they're just
yep.
trying to recreate schooling.
That is a sure path to burning out. You can't
Mhm.
replicate school, and the child shouldn't be expected to replicate school. And
Mhm.
being in the homeschooling arena, that's one of the biggest hesitations we see
Mhm.
for new homeschooling parents is, oh, I couldn't teach my children all this. I couldn't teach them. Well, you learned all this yourself. So
Mhm.
if the school was effective at teaching you, or you would have,
Mhm.
if this scenario was
Yeah,
promoting a learning environment, you should know it all, but you
good to
didn't.
go.
You memorized it, you regurgitated it out, and then decided it was of no use to you because it really wasn't.
And you're so religiously tied to that system. You're so enslaved by it that your answer to not knowing how to teach your child this stuff that you realize isn't important is to send them into the same system that left you feeling ill-equipped.
I know, right?
Like if
It's
that's
the
not a if that's not cult behavior, I don't know what is. Right? That's Stockholm syndrome. I mean, there's any number of things that you can call that, but that's exactly what that is. And it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And by the way, I always talk to parents too before their kids, go into school where all of a sudden magically they have to have certain things that have to be done at certain times. I'll ask them, well, what language does your child speak? they'll tell me, whatever. English usually is usually who I'm talking to because I can only speak English. And they're like, well, English. I'm like, oh, cool. What school did you teach? What school did you send them to prior to this for them to learn that? Like, well, I didn't send them anywhere. I'm like, oh, but they still know how to do it, right? Because you did teach them,
Yeah.
because this is how learning works. So let that be the catalyst for everything else you're
Yeah.
doing.
What is that? The foundations of that are observation, learning, being around experts, because we're experts at speaking the English language,
Hmm.
and real life application.
That's it.
They see you apply speech in a real world,
Hmm.
describing things, speaking to them, interacting with other adults. They see speech being utilized in the real world.
Yep.
And those two foundational things, observation and real world application,
Yep. And so then they
they're
give it a shot.
huge.
And they give it a shot, and then you give them a little coaching, and you don't care if they don't say things the right way when they're babies, because you know they're going to
Yep,
get there. You don't care if they fall down when they're learning to walk, because you know they're going to get there. You cheer on the failures. You keep showing them how to do it. You keep giving
exactly.
them a little guidance. You keep giving them a little bit, and eventually they're doing just fine.
That point right there. And it's something everyone's internalized but doesn't quite realize. You don't fail your child when they
Right.
stumble when they're learning to walk. You don't fail them when they say the word wrong. You don't. What do? You encourage them. You
Right.
teach them that actually that part, those failures, those stumbling after one step, the stumbling
Hmm.
after three steps, the stumbling after five steps, those failures are vital to learning. And
Hmm.
the school system tells you failure is a bad word. But your
Right.
child wouldn't walk if they didn't try again after they failed, if they didn't learn from their failure. Your
Mhm.
child wouldn't talk if they didn't learn from the failures they had when they were learning.
That's right. That's exactly it. And school says, well, if you fail, something's wrong. You've got to go
Yep.
remedial. You got to go over here, right? And then simultaneously, they'll say things like, "We want to create lifelong learners." Like they'll say that because that's the buzzword, right? That's the
Yeah.
"We
Yeah.
want to create lifelong learners." You failed right there. F. Go backward. Like it. It's the most hypocritical BS. It's a bunch of nonsense. But they know what things to say. But look at what's actually being done.
Yeah. Yeah. But that bleeds into the whole sort of like the cult mentality you talked about and that emotional attachment to school rather than the logical attachment, because logically people know
Yep.
there's grave concerns around the public school system and
All right.
justified concerns. There's lots of parents um, on social media, in particular, you see the stories go around where they're fighting the school system and they're
Mhm.
challenging the school system um, over bullying, over indecent material being used in schools and being exposed to um, inappropriate messaging and ideals. And these parents will go and they'll fight the school, and everyone will cheer them on. And then the school will turn around. Well, firstly, the school did it because the school thought it was okay to begin with, so they're not
Mhm.
going to stop doing it, right?
No.
But what happens then? You're going to fight them again? But you posted a tweet today, which was which was a similar vein to that about taking your child to McDonald's
Mhm.
and knowingly exposing them to the poison, but then going back and going back and going back, and
Sending them
it's
back
the
in anyway.
it's the same messaging
Yep.
around those that inappropriate content. If you went to a restaurant and
Yep.
they had posters all over the wall, and the servers were talking to your children about really explicit material,
Yep.
you'd complain to the restaurant, and rightfully so. Would you ever go back there?
Of
No.
course.
You'd
Nope.
find somewhere else to eat, or you'd eat at home,
Yep.
right?
But this,
But we
you
don't.
send the kids right back in.
They just send the kids right back. And how are you? What message are you sending? Because there's that emotion. Like logically, they can see it's wrong and they're fighting it, but or they're at least trying to fight it. But then they're just sending their kids back into the same system that they believe
Yep.
is diametrically opposed to their values.
Exactly right. And I understand that it's hard. I
Yeah,
understand
of
that. I
course.
get it. I get that you grew up thinking that that wasn't a thing, or you grew up not thinking about it at all. It was just
Hmm.
by default, like, hey, if I have kids someday, I'll just send them to the local school. That's what I did, and everything was fine, quote unquote fine. And not like I get that. I get it. And so now all of a sudden your world is shaken up and you've got to figure something else out, and you can't do it by tomorrow, and that is stressful. I get it. I'm with you. I empathize with that.
Yeah,
But kids are worth it. These are your kids.
absolutely.
Like, how are they not, right? And what if you again that restaurant, right? You find out they're poisoning the food just a tiny little bit every single day. And you're like, gosh, but I never planned on giving my kid 3 meals. I planned on giving them one. I planned on them getting 2 meals out of this restaurant. So
Hmm.
like, but hey, every time they get
Yeah,
one of those
yeah,
pills, there's a little bit of poison in there. You're just gonna keep going and being like, all right, well, hopefully this one meal later on at night that I'm making, hopefully that'll outweigh the 2 poisonous meals that they get throughout the day. And I'll just do
hmm
that for 13 years and let's see if my child turns out healthy. No, you're not gonna do, nobody's gonna do that. And nobody's gonna think that your one meal that's not full of poison is going to outweigh or somehow undo the 2 meals of poison,
yeah,
right? So that whole thing of like, ah, gosh, school is a hot mess and I don't, but I'll take, when they get home, I'll just make sure I counteract that and counteract with my own messaging and my own parenting. You think that's the way it works? It's not
yeah.
the way it works.
And
You're still exposing them to all of that garbage.
yeah, that's the thing. And this is the point I argue when people are fighting they're actively fighting this system. It's like, well, great. It's great that you're challenging the school on those things, but you can't unexpose your child to things. You
Bingo.
can't. You
Yep.
can't. The best medicine is prevention, you know?
Bingo.
And it's the same for the public school system. Once they're exposed to that poison, to that explicit material, you can't unexpose them. You can't take that back.
Mm-mm.
That is now in their minds and their bodies forever. You
Yep.
can do as much as you want at home, but it's too, it's not enough. And that's one of the other points. And you touched on it before about how ineffective or inefficient the public school system actually is. The number one contributor to how well your child does in public school is the effort you put in at home as parents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how does that make sense? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's the number one. It's the number one indicator of how well they'll do homeschooling too. You're
Mm-hmm.
just cut out the middleman. You're just sending them. You've got to do all this extra work anyway. You have to completely pour into your child's education anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It
Why
just
not make it
it's
worthwhile?
so inefficient, so ineffective.
Mhm. Yep. But that's again, it's a cultural design around that. And again, that was not unintentional, right? Let's get
Hmm.
everybody into the
Yeah,
workforce. Let's blow things up to where everybody thinks everybody needs to, everybody needs 2 incomes. Everybody, mom and dad have to get out of the house. You have to have a babysitter, a place to send your child. And then
yeah,
we lock that child down very early on who he or she is going to be. We capture them. They're going to get older and just perpetuate the cycle. And who wins? The system. The system wins. The system perpetuates
every
itself
time.
every single time, and so it takes brave people to go, okay, we're going to figure out something else.
Absolutely. It does because it's a huge deviation from the norm.
Mhm.
Doing anything outside of public school,
Mhm.
even the next step up, which is like private school, it's still a deviation from the norm, and it still requires quite considerably more sacrifice than the
Mhm.
public school system would require of you.
Mhm.
And it can be a big shock to people because you had this, like you said, you had this entire plan where you outsourced this entire section, this pretty large section of your child's life, pretty large section of your responsibility as a parent, and all of
Mhm.
a sudden it's yours.
Mhm. Yeah,
And it's
100%.
easy because if your child comes out of school and they're uneducated or you believe they failed, well, that's the school's fault. But
Yeah,
now if my child comes out, reaches adulthood and they don't know anything and they don't know how to live, now it's my fault.
correct. That's exactly right. That's the biggest
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that's it. It's easy to be able to point the fingers and go, oh gosh, look at that. It feels better. You're
Yeah.
parenting no matter what. You're the primary educator no matter what. I would rather take the responsibility and be able to go, okay, I'm still going to be the primary educator, even if I'm sending them away for this many hours a day. I'm the
Hmm.
primary educator in their life. So I would rather take the responsibility and fall on my sword and see what I can do. And by the way, that's just called being a parent, right?
Yep.
Like before the conveyor belt schooling system was compulsory, guess what? People just parented. They raised their
Yep.
children all the time. The children were with
Absolutely.
them all day long. That's been the norm a lot longer than the compulsory schooling
Yeah.
system around,
Yeah.
right? That was the norm
And
for way longer.
and what people don't realize, and it's an interesting point to reflect on, is that actually the default mode of education is homeschooling, because you have to opt in to the public school system. You have
Yep.
to fill out a form, you have to send them a letter, you have to say, I would like to use this system. Here's my child's details. Until you do that, the default system is homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
That is the default of every parent. And like you said, it was the default and the norm for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years prior
That's right.
to the establishment of the public school system.
That's right. And going back to, is there a little bit of intentionality from a government standpoint? What you see now is even with people choosing now to see, we got over 5 million homeschoolers now in the US, right? And what you're seeing now is government still trying to overreach because they know so many people are pulling out and going home. They're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool. There's laws now around homeschooling, and you've got to do X amount. You got to ask for our permission to do this, this, and
Oh
this. And
yeah.
people are complying with a bunch of just ridiculous nonsense, that they're looking for ways to obey and comply again,
Yep.
and it's
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know if it is just a DNA thing where I just refuse to operate that way, or if it is because I have been inside the system and saw everything, and no, I don't, or maybe it's a mix of both, man. I don't know.
There's
I don't get that compliance
People are
factor.
surprised at how many people from the education system decide to go homeschooling.
Oh yeah.
They've been in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, they've seen 100%. They've seen it, man. They know. Yep,
Yeah.
100%.
And my family and I are blessed in that we have to do nothing here in the UK
Yeah.
to homeschool. There's
Yep.
no, there is the constant messaging and the constant attempted government overreach.
Yep.
Nothing yet has taken place.
Yep.
But I know dads in the dad schooling community, they've been talking about it. They've been sending me messages, showing me pictures. These are the application forms we have to fill out and send them to the state, and then they'll review to decide whether we can homeschool.
Yep.
It that's I can't even put into words. That makes me feel.
Yep. Nope. There's no way. I can't. I don't know, man. I can't do that. I don't do the blind compliance and blind obedience thing. And especially when it comes to my kids, like, it's just not
because
happening.
because they'll always say, and there was actually an article published um, in the UK by the BBC. I don't know if how familiar you are with them, but it was to do with the rise in home education across the UK. And
Mm,
the commentary throughout was, well, homeschooling might be great for a small number of families, but school is the best place for children, for the vast majority of children. And it's
mhm.
that messaging, right? And it's those
Really?
words are very important, because what they're saying is, the state is the
Right.
best place for kids to be. When in actuality, you should, in very rare cases, there's exceptions, but the best place for children is with their family. The
Yeah.
best place for children is with their parents.
Yeah. I mean, talk about religious messaging, right?
Yeah.
Talk about religious messaging. Like, the system is the best place for your family. We will let you know when you can see them and what you can do with them. The system
Yep.
is the best
Yep.
place for your family. Hey,
Yep.
lions, the best place for your family is in the zoo and cage to make sure you're fed
Yep.
exactly what we want to feed you.
Mm-hmm.
That whole responsibility and freedom thing, dangerous. You don't want that. You want the
No.
safety and security of the state taking care of you.
Yeah.
And
I
make
mean,
sure we raise your children to do what we want them to do.
yeah. Yeah. And we have plenty of friends and know plenty of people who have kids in the public school system. Um, you know, and every time they talk about wanting to go on vacation, and
Mhm.
having to ask permission from the school to take their children out if it's during school time. It's like having to ask permission. It's unbelievable. It's unreal. And only sitting outside the system now can I see how bizarre that is. It
Isn't it?
doesn't just train the children, it trains the parents.
You bet.
It trains them. You need to ask permission from the state to do these things with your family.
You
You need
bet.
to make sure that we allow you to do what you've asked to do.
That's right.
We'll give you permission. You need permission from us to do what's best for your family.
And people go right along with it.
They do. They do. They
I mean,
absolutely do.
I can't get on board, man.
No. And circling back a little bit to what we were talking about in terms of, it's a big sacrifice being pulling your children out of the public school system. Regardless of what you do afterwards, it's a big sacrifice. You know, homeschooling is a large sacrifice in particular.
Mhm.
But and one, you know, why so many people are averse to that, and I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it, but I think generally as a society, we've become sacrifice averse.
Mhm.
You know, we're living now in the age, or at least it feels like the age of the family is coming
Mhm.
to an end, and the age of the self
Mhm.
is reaching a crescendo. You know,
Mhm.
comfort is king today. It
Mhm.
is, don't make yourself uncomfortable. Don't go out of, you know, your comfort zone. Indulge as often as possible.
Mhm.
Make as few sacrifices as you need to.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
choosing a different path than the public school system is a huge sacrifice. So as a society, we're conditioned to not want to sacrifice because that
Yeah.
would put me out. And I want my wine every night. I want to go out and do whatever I want on the weekend, or I want to get rid of the
Right.
kids, you know?
Right. Right. That's exactly, yeah, the self-indulgence is a big thing. And then even for those that are like, because I think again, just like learning is a default setting for humans, you've got more and more, because I know we're speaking to a lot of fathers here, right? You got more and more
Mm,
men that are also seeing like, hey man, I actually need purpose. I need something to conquer. I need something to go
yeah.
get. Right. But we actually go, okay, hey, bread and circus, here's what you're going to do. You need to go run a Spartan race. You need to go run, and look, I got nothing wrong with those. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
Go get it. That's awesome. But we don't talk about, okay, what about the battle of like raising a strong family and making that the sacrifice, making
Hmm.
that the thing, where it's like, okay, we're going to raise a sovereign family. We're going to fight back against the system. And that's what I'm going to do for my adventure. And that's what I'm like, we don't think about that because
No.
again, you've got the religiosity around and the fear around. Well, if you don't send your kids to, there's all the common BS. If you don't send your kids to school, fill in the blank, right? They're never going to get into college. They're not going to be happy. They're
Yep.
not going to have any friends. They're not going to be social. They're not going to, you just see all of these provably BS myths get fed into that too. And so we're in a self-indulgent culture, but we're a fear-based culture too.
Yes.
We're a fear-based society. We live in fear of everything. And so we don't want to take a risk of doing what somebody else says is risky because
Yeah.
we're afraid.
And this ties in quite nicely to one of the things that I'm quite fond of with the Apogee movement
Mm,
is that you have programs for everyone, you know, and talk a lot about the programs for kids because
yep.
that's, you know, that's a focal point of many discussions. And
Yep.
but there's stuff on there for men, there's stuff on there for women, young men, young women,
Yep.
because it really is, you know, education
Yeah.
really is a family endeavor. It's really a lifestyle. It's really
Yep.
a,
That's
like
it.
you said, it's sovereignty. You can't
That's
have
right.
sovereign kids
That's right.
if you have complacent or trapped parents. You can't
That's
have
right.
sovereign parents and trapped children.
That's right. That's all. So here's what people don't talk about enough, I guess, with education. Being educated is very simple. It's not easy, but it's a very simple process. And the best way to have highly educated children, the most simple way to have highly educated children is for mom and dad to continuously increase their own educations and bring their kids
Yep.
along. Right? That's it. Like that's the most simple way. So when we have we're trying to come alongside parents who are like, shoot, okay, I did not plan to have to do anything outside of normal school. I see it now. I'm not in a place either emotionally or, financial, whatever it looks like, man. We're not in a place, but we want to send them somewhere else. Okay, so we're building these campuses and our home education programs to show families what can possibly happen. But mom and dad will be going through an educational process too because even with kids on our campuses, if they're on there all day and they're growing and they're going into, they're taking on these big problems and they're leaning into Socratic discussions and they're building businesses and all of this, it is essentially just growth mindset on steroids all day long, and they get home to mom and dad who aren't growing. Well, that's to the detriment of the child. So we want to make sure
Absolutely.
mom and dad are growing as well.
Yep. And you've got one of two things that's going to happen. Either all the work will be done, as we've discussed, with, you know, going to public school and coming home and the, you know, the parents not putting the effort in. It's a very
Mhm.
similar thing there. Or and the second thing, excuse me, the second thing that will happen is you get this dissolution of the trust between parent and child, because
Mhm.
you see them for hypocrites. Because
Mhm.
and I'm a big believer in how how hypocritical modern society is, and how
Mhm.
important it is to lead by example, because you can't sit there, smoking 10 a day and then tell your kids smoking's bad and stop. You can't
Mhm.
sit there trying to preach the importance of exercise, healthy eating, and you're overweight on the couch all day.
Right.
Because I mean, you don't believe it, and your kids think the world of you, but
Yeah.
the words that are coming out of your mouth do not align with your actions. And the underlying principle there is, I
Yeah.
cannot trust what you say, because if
That's
you
right.
believed what you said,
You
you'd
would
do
do
it.
that. That's right. That's it. And kids sniff that out. Even if they don't consciously sniff it out, they see
Oh,
it.
yeah,
Right? They
yeah.
see it.
They
Oh, it's
they
like
internalize it
they
deeply.
internalize it, man. They internalize that. We all know that people will say the things they wish they believed. What they do is what they believe. That's it. What you
Yeah,
do is what you believe. So it's that. And I judge, a person's words and their actions. The amount of respect they get is inversely proportionate to how close those two things are. So if their words and their actions are right on top of each other, cool, man, all the respect in the world. If they're freaking far apart over here, we got no respect for that. Kids sniff that out.
yeah.
Sniff it out.
They got a sixth sense for it.
Yep,
Like you
100%.
said, even if it's not conscious, and that's what will happen when they come home, if they're attending a campus like yours, and mom and dad aren't on the same wavelength, they'll immediately recognize that.
They sniff it out. And then guess what? They're still going to be who mom and dad are. Chances are pretty solid, right? That they're going to still lean into who mom and dad, because they are the primary educators. So they're going to be who mom and dad are before they do what mom and dad say. Like
Yes, yes.
that's always it, right? They're gonna follow the example they are seeing. They'll recognize the words don't match, and they'll recognize hypocrisy, but they'll go, okay, but this is what to do right here. Just like I
Yeah,
learned to walk, just like I learned to talk, I'm gonna learn to act this way because that's how mom and dad actually act. It doesn't match with what they're saying, which is weird to me, and I'll figure out when I'm older that that's called hypocrisy. But I'm gonna go ahead and pretend that that doesn't matter right now. I'm just gonna do what they're doing.
yeah,
So mom
absolutely.
and
And
dad better
it's
be growing
because you're always leading by example. Whether you
all the
take
time.
that role, you're always
100%.
a leader in your home, whether you take that role
100%.
seriously or not. And if you
Yep.
want to be apathetic, which, many men are, I definitely was. I was one of those guys. Never saw the importance of, completely taken in by the system. Um, you know,
Yep.
Men who are leaders are abusive and sexist against women and yada yada, all that spiel, you know,
100%.
all that spiel. And so many men are still in that trap. So many men. And when dad is trapped, the kids are trapped. You can't have sovereign kids without sovereign parents.
That's right. That's exactly
And
it,
that's
man.
that's the that's what I love a lot about your movement, your cause. It's recognizing that. It's recognizing that nothing's going to happen with those kids if it doesn't happen with mom and
Mm.
dad as well.
Yeah. So that's the whole, you know, the whole lifelong learner thing and the whole critical
Hmm.
thinking thing that schools they love to say. Well, we want to make sure we're actually doing that. And lifelong learner, we've got to have the parents involved too, and that's it. And that's a hard part of the game, man. That really is. And any school owners will tell you, anybody that's privatized, and obviously public school teachers too will tell you, like parents are some of the hardest part of the whole thing. For
Yeah,
better, or for worse. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. But parents that's a really difficult job. And again, I shout out to teachers even in the system that I hate, because most of them are there for good reasons, and
absolutely.
they actually do care about the kids, and parents can be hard, man. So, we want to make sure that we have parents on a path of growth too. I don't believe I believe you have to earn the right to have an opinion, man, on anything, right? Which means you have to argue against yourself better than anybody else. All right, you got to flesh out your own BS before you want to run your mouth
Yeah.
about it. So having somebody who has an opinion about everything that they've never done is kind of silly. But unfortunately, we have, and I'm not saying parents shouldn't have a right to talk about what's being taught at school. They should. What ends up happening in a lot of these privatized sort of deals, though, is your parents will come in and they'll say, hey, we want this is what should it be. And I'm like, but the hypocrisy, you're not doing that. Let me show
Hmm.
you how to actually do that, because that'll help you change your perspective. So if I can help you grow too, then you're going to go, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I get why my son and daughter are doing this too. Cool. We can all go on this adventure together. Like that's what we're doing, is getting the opportunity to have everybody on the same page, or at least open conversations around definition of terms to get everybody as close to the same page as possible. There's no such thing as perfection. There's no such thing as a panacea. If I was telling you we had it all figured out and, we'd never make a mistake, you should freaking run far, far away. But what I'm telling you is, we're going to do the best we can to get everybody on the same page, at least agree upon values, define terms for how we can all move together, go forward, and we'll adapt as we need to adapt. Again, the antithesis of everything's school.
Absolutely.
School is from a systemic standpoint.
Yes, and just wanted to reiterate the point. I know people, I speak to other dads in the education system, and they're great guys. They are. It's
For
just
sure.
one man, one woman. They're not going to go into the belly of the beast and change it all. And I
Yeah.
get that they go in with great intentions. I really
Yep.
do. But
Yep.
it's an impossible fight, and I feel for them because there's people in there who don't agree with the system, and they're
Yep.
trying to fight from the inside. But I feel like it's a losing battle. Certainly without the support of the parents, like you said, the parents are the most difficult people.
Yeah,
And
very, very hard. Yeah, and
many,
it's again, it's not a system that's designed to change at all.
no,
All of these protests that would happen, I mean, theoretically that would change, potentially change things. It's not designed to change. Administrators don't have power to change things. They've got to answer to somebody, and the superintendent has to answer to somebody. Everybody has to
yeah,
answer to this. Like everybody has to answer to somebody. And again, you've got the government who controls and funds all of that, and they're going, no, this is exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it, and you got to jump. Otherwise, you don't get your money. You don't get your,
that's
so
exactly,
the system's not going to change.
exactly. As much as they're fighting from the inside, if the higher ups say jump, they're going to have to say how high.
Yep, 100%. Yep.
And and my heart does bleed for those people.
Same.
Because I know great guys and great women in the system that are doing their best.
Yep.
And I'll talk a lot about the dangers and the detriment of the public school system, and people will ask me, well, how do we get rid of it? And it's like, well, I don't think we ever could get rid of it, and I don't think, and if I could snap my fingers tomorrow, I wouldn't get rid of it because it's
Right.
so ingratiated into society at the moment.
Yeah.
It needs to be a gradual awakening of people, and people need to,
Yeah.
as you've the theme, the theme of the point that's been throughout the conversation is, we need to get the parents up first. It's not, you
Mhm.
couldn't just sweep the public school system out from under everybody and expect society, expect everyone to cope, because those parents are not trained to cope.
Yeah.
They're not of the mindset. Most people aren't of the mindset to take that responsibility on. Certainly not in one fell swoop. It's got to
Yeah.
be a gradual thing, and maybe, who knows, if more
Yeah.
people wake up and more people take more responsibility, there will be some modicum of change for the better, at least with a reduction in class sizes.
Yeah. I mean, that's really it. Is if we can get a good example, I always use CrossFit as an example, right? CrossFit, everybody knows what it is, whether you like it or don't like it. I don't care. But the point is, CrossFit changed fitness. It gave a whole bunch of people a place to go that looked different than the classic bodybuilding style workouts that people were doing. And so what happened was people in your traditional gyms started integrating, CrossFit style classes. And a lot of people started integrating that kind of methodology. And now people realize there's a choice. And that's really what we want to do too, is just go, okay, look, let's just go ahead and show what's different. Because I'm with you. I don't want public schools to go away anytime soon, partially because there are some kids who have horrible parents.
Yeah,
Right? They have horrible parents. So the best
absolutely.
humans they see are in that system. I want them to continue to see good humans. I want them to have those 2 meals a day versus the one meal at home. Those 2 meals are better. There's more poison in the one meal than the two for some of these kids. Right. So I want them to go get that. I want them to have the best possible scenario for themselves. And if that's the best possible scenario because their parents suck, then I want them to be there. Right. I want them to have that. But what we're building is kind of that CrossFit version of like, I want it to get, to a point where, okay, this is a very obvious systemic change that everybody can see. We want to make it accessible to everybody else as well, as accessible as we can make it. When we do that, then people can go, okay, well, I got a choice. Now I got a choice to make, and
Yes,
I can see this other choice. And then, and again, part of sovereignty and freedom is being able to make those choices. But
absolutely.
if it's a choice you can't actually embark upon, then that's tough, right? And so we want to make it, prevalent and accessible.
Yes. Uh, that's always sort of the foundational cause right there. Certainly
Mm-hmm.
from people who like myself from a homeschooling family. I
Mm-hmm.
was never homeschooled, but we homeschool our kids.
Yep.
That they the goal is to get people in the public and,
Yep.
and the wider community to just think of other educational options as legitimate choices,
Exactly.
is to not think that homeschooling is for the weird recluses that don't want their kids bothering with any other kids because
Right.
or the hyper seclusive religious family who is weird beyond anything and nobody ever wants to bother with them. We
That's
don't.
right.
We just want people, parents to think, right? Okay, my child is due for formal education in a
Mhm.
year's time. What path are we taking?
Yeah. What do we want to
Which
do?
which route are we going to take? What do you want to do? How do we
Yep.
want to do this?
Yep.
Because right now, the vast majority of the population just default to the public school system,
Right.
just as that's decided before they have kids.
Mhm. Mhm. It's the default religion.
Yeah.
That's what else do you do that with? You do it with
Well,
religion, and now it's the medical system, is starting to creep in too. And it's like, oh, well, you have to, you're weird if you're going to have a child at home. There's no way. It doesn't matter that billions of people did it for, however many years. That's weird. You got to go there and you got to immediately start, making sure that the system tells you what to do and how to raise them and when to give them this and when to give them that, because there's no way,
mhm.
otherwise they're going to die. Right. And it's like, how did people survive prior to this? It's not it's not this extreme or that extreme. Think through,
Yeah.
think. That's it. That's all I want people to be able to do is think, be intentional,
Yeah.
think, make a choice.
And look, and that's the message I try to share in the dad schooling community, because we have a huge section of guys who are already homeschooling, and we have a
Mm,
huge section of guys whose children are too young, or whose
mm,
children are still in the school system and they're considering it and they're actually challenging the status quo. And that's what
mm,
we're there to do, is to say, look, here are the real benefits of doing this. Here's how
mm,
you make it feasible. You may hear all this stuff about how can I afford it? My kid's going to grow up weird. How will they get qualifications? But
mm.
here's the actual reality of it, and here's the reality for hundreds of dads who are already doing it.
That's right.
You can see that we're all normal people. Our kids are all normal.
Yeah. Yeah, that really screws it up when it's like, homeschool kids are all weird and up. It's like I brought my kids today. We had to go out
Yeah.
and run some errands, and people were like, oh my gosh, how old are your kids? So 13, 11, and 8. And they're like, geez Louise, like, how do you they're not normal. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, what do you, and they weren't meaning they're weird. They're like, I was like talking to 3 adults. I'm like, mm-hmm. They're like, wow, that's crazy. How do you do that with it? I'm like, it's not anything special, but they don't go to school.
Yeah.
Like that's a
I
huge
mean,
part, right? We're
we
not handicapping them with school. That's a big part of
we've
it.
we've had this exact conversation recently, where we attended a new church, and
Mm,
my children went to the Sunday school, and the ladies who run it came out and were just shocked and said, your kids, they had conversations with us.
mhm.
They stood there and they talked to us and they talked back, and it's like some of the kids we've dealt with, it just
Yeah.
they answer the question and that's it. They put their head back
Yep.
down.
Head down.
It's really
Yep.
difficult to get stuff out of them.
Mhm.
And these your kids were really confident, really
Yeah.
open and confident in talking to us as adults, and just completely bewildered by how that could possibly be.
And look, I understand that there are kids who go to school who are still very social and able to
Yeah,
communicate.
yeah.
Did that. I understand that there are kids who are being raised at home and homeschooled, and they're being raised by parents who might be strange and not good communicators, and they're strange and not good communicators, right?
Hmm.
But to give a blanket statement that one is going to make the other is crazy. And if I'm looking at the totality of it, the totality of the environment that's around them, if I had to pick one subgroup to be concerned about when it came to socialization and being able to communicate, it's not the homeschool community.
Yep.
It's kids in the conveyor belt schooling system now. I think it is very much shifted to where that, to me,
Yes.
where I worry most about, quote unquote, socialization, being able to communicate, being able to communicate effectively, being able to, articulate what you believe and why you believe it,
Yep.
being able to potentially listen to somebody else's point of view and not get emotionally wrecked if it is different than yours, being able to have an opinion that you've earned and you've actually thought through. Like, I
Hmm.
think chances are you're going to get that from the homeschool community more so than, than your public school counterparts at this point.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And perhaps there's a
Mhm.
little bit of bias, but I'm still inclined to
Sure.
inclined to agree.
Yeah.
Um, and that largely because I don't think the public school system teaches those foundational skills, those meta skills of communication,
Right.
cooperation, leadership. And you have those
Sure.
group projects and standing up in front of the class and everything, but those are like real like microcosms. They're micro environments in which they exist. And people think, oh yeah, I'll send my kids to school so they can be socialized. But actually, your kids are sitting in this very, very controlled environment, very
Right.
controlled and very repetitive and same environment day in, day out.
Yeah.
And they
Same
might be
environment.
talking in front of a class or they might be working as a group, but it's in this real,
Yeah.
bubble.
It's in this bubble with people only of their own age. They're still having to
Yep.
raise their hand and ask if they can go to the bathroom. They're being told when they could talk, when they can't. And then to get some sort of sense of freedom when they're out on a break or a recess or whatever, they're expressing themselves a lot of times in horrible ways. And for some kids,
Yes.
that is the only way they can start to espouse all kinds of negativity that's coming from all kinds of stuff. They're being fed prison food, right? And so physiology plays into account too. They're being
Yep.
fed all this garbage. They're being told they can't sit still, so they probably have a methamphetamine deficiency too. So we're going to have to medicate them early and often, right? And so we're building out this population again in a system that is not mirrored anywhere else. The closest you mirror that kind of system anywhere else in society is in prison.
Yep. Yep.
That's the
And I
closest mirror to a system that you'd operate in on a daily basis, right? And so what is that what we're preparing them for? Because it doesn't look like a microcosm of the world and what the world requires. Like it does not, So
yeah.
that to me is so, and that becomes the habit of how you live your life. That's how you start to see
Yeah.
life. So what are the habits that are developed there? The habits of apathy and the habits of blind obedience and compliance and all the things like, again,
Hmm.
the behavioral management system done over a long period of time. Those are hard habits to break, man.
Yeah. It takes you know, I'll hold my hand up and say I'm still, fighting through and
Sure.
fighting through habits I've picked
Sure.
up, fighting through mindsets
Yep.
I've picked up
Yep.
to this day. And
Yep.
I have to, I'll find myself sinking back into something and I'll have to go, nope, nope,
Yep.
I'm not gonna go back. I'm not gonna go back to that because actually, you're worth a lot more. You have a lot more skills than you ever thought you did. You need to stay away from falling back into that. But like you said, 13 years. And honestly, education starts in the UK at 3. Right?
Hmm.
They can go into full-time education at the age of 3 here,
Hmm. Hmm.
and are encouraged to.
Of course they
Um,
are. That's right.
and that's an additional 2 years. That's a huge amount of conditioning
During,
because
during your
it's the same
prime years
environment
of
day in,
development.
day out.
Yep. Prime years of development, right? Your brain is
Yeah.
developing on this. How does the world work? And that is the primary driver for your viewpoints. As much as parents want to say, like, just look timing wise. I mean, you've got so many other people, so much other time, so many other systems that have massive amounts of influence, far more than you are going to if you
Hmm.
sacrifice that. I can't, man. I'm not a perfect being by any stretch of the imagination, but I have this crazy ass idea that I should be the one to implement beliefs and systems and a way of living on my kids more than anybody else. And then as they get
Yeah.
older, they start, and I'm not saying we don't expose them. I don't like people hear that and they're like, oh, you lock a kid in the freaking closet. No, my kids interact with the world more than any, they interact with the world more than their conveyor belt counterparts. They are
Hmm.
always out and about interacting with the world in a million different ways, whether it's running their businesses, whether it's out at, their activities in gymnastics and kickboxing and, whatever. They're out
Yeah.
at the store, they're out at like they're interacting with people all day long, all day long.
Hmm.
right? But
In a
I get
variety of people.
in a variety of people, but I get to espouse our values as a family and say, look, these are the values. And then as they get older, I want to surround them with other because they're going to look for other people to listen to too. And that's great. And I want to
Yes.
expose them to great people, right? And it's like, oh, you want to shelter them. No, it's called parenting. You expose them to great people. You and I don't
Hmm.
go, oh man, well, we need to get better. I guess we should go spend some time in prison so we can be exposed to everybody. Like, what? No, you want to get better. Who do you expose yourself to? People who are better than you at the thing you want to get better at.
Absolutely.
So we don't want to do the same thing with my kids. That's not a crazy idea,
No,
right?
it's your
People look
it's
at
your
it and be like,
right as a parent.
you're sheltering them. No, I am surrounding them with great humans so they can be the greatest version of themselves. That's what I'm supposed to do.
Absolutely. And it's
I was
your,
with myself.
it's your parental right. And I think maybe it's optimism, but I wholeheartedly believe that fire exists in all men. It
For
does.
sure.
It has to. But the system does a great job of keeping those flames down.
For sure. And then we take on the reins too, right? Because we end up taking those reins to keep our fire out ourselves. Now that's what
Oh
sucks.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
right, we get
Been there.
trained, we get the fire sucked out of us, and then we get trained on how to make sure the fire stays away. And so then we become these adult children who keep our own fire down, right? We keep our own distractions away. We convince
Yeah.
ourselves not to exercise. We convince ourselves to eat like crap. We convince ourselves to hang out with people who are not pushing themselves forward. We convince
Hmm.
ourselves that even though I hate my job and I hate what I'm doing, that when I come home, I go ahead and I deserve to take a break. And so I'll spend 4 hours on
Indulge.
Netflix and social media, or just watch football over here, or I'll play video games over here, and I'll check off that box of like accomplishing something and
Yeah.
something that doesn't matter. And I'll just do that as my existence. And so we keep our own flame out.
Absolutely. I think, you know, going back to that, the whole comfort is king. You do
Yep.
whatever you can to
Yep.
ensure that you can spend the maximum amount of time indulging.
Yep.
That
Yep.
that is what is, and that is success.
Right.
That is happiness. That is success. That is happiness. That is what every man should strive for.
Yeah. I
And
should
you're
strive for
absolutely
that.
right. I
Right.
kept my own fire doused for years and years and years, much to my own shame, and
Same.
go ahead. Yeah.
Same, same. I mean, I've done the same. I mean, I made mistakes too, and I did the same thing. And I did coming out as a young buck and in my early 20s, and didn't know what to, like, just wasted so much freaking time.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
So, look, I get it, 100%. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm pointing at myself too, because I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, as soon as I figured out that that's what I was doing, and realized that there was no, you don't get happiness from chasing happiness. You don't chase indulgence. You chase a purpose. You
That's exactly
chase
right.
something to create and something to build. And then, hey, by the way, the byproduct of that ends up being joy and ends up being
Yeah.
happiness. Right? You chase service, you chase doing the right thing, you chase all those things. And so once I figured that out, once somebody hears this, what we're talking about right here, if they hear this, now well, then it's on them to make a choice. Now it's on you, right? Now
Hmm.
maybe you realize, oh, okay, this is what I've been doing. Cool. Now you got a choice to make. You're going to keep doing that like a boy, or you're going to man up and go do the thing that needs to get done. You got a choice.
And that is one of the most empowering things I've ever internalized. Never here it is. When you realize that it's actually a choice, you realize you have the power. You have the power to make the
Right.
choice, and you have the power to change something.
That's right.
When you realize that actually you have a choice outside of the public school system, it is a choice.
Mm.
You have the power to take control of your
Mhm.
legacy. And
Yep.
that's the whole mission of dad schooling. It's to empower those men to take
Yep.
control of their legacy, to
Yep.
take back that control, because we hand it over.
Mhm.
We willingly hand our legacy over to the state. It's
Mhm.
something like 16,000 hours that children spend in school throughout throughout that period. That's a huge amount to be under the influence of the state
That's
or
crazy.
someone else whose values are opposed to your own.
Think about how good you can get at something in that many hours,
Oof.
right? And you do. You get good at something. You just get good at what we've been talking about, being
Yeah,
obedient. You get good at compliance. You get good at apathy.
yeah. The school is incredibly effective at what it's designed to do.
100%.
And there's a mantra that I've seen a few times. The system does if the system does what it was meant to do. And people will say, oh, but the system needs to be better. The public education system needs to be better. No, it's perfect at what it does. It
Yeah.
was designed to do this. If it was designed to provide a fulfilling and complete education,
Yeah.
and it wasn't doing that, it'd start working towards it. People
Right.
would put things in place to make sure it did that,
Right.
but people don't, because it does everything it's supposed to do.
You've got people, again, like we were saying, you got people that see that it's wrong and still send their kids there. Tell me it's not doing a great job. It's got you so wrapped up that you can hate it and still send your kids there. Like, what else can do? I mean, that's impressively powerful.
Huge.
It's doing exactly what it needs to do.
So it's a force of nature.
Okay.
And that's the word I always want to use, is empower, because you don't change minds by belittling people and mocking people and calling them names. I mean, I'm happy to mock the system, and I always will, because it's a system. But
Sure.
individual parents, they need
Yep.
to be empowered. That's what it's all about. It's empowering them because they feel powerless.
Yep. That's it. That's all it is showing them what the choice is. Being honest that it's a hard choice sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be a difficult thing, giving them a roadmap, and then they're going to choose to follow the roadmap or not. That's it. Like, that's all we're doing. Like, people, what's your best sales pitch for Apogee and what you guys are doing? I will not try to sell you on it. I'll tell you what we're doing. I'll tell you how it works. I'll tell you what's expected on our side. I'll tell you what's expected on your side. And if you want to put in the work, sweet, awesome. Here we go. If not, okay, at least you know that it's there. That's on you.
Well, exactly. You'd be opposed to your message of sovereignty if it was any other way.
Bingo. That's exactly right. If we came in and said, hey, no, this has got to be, let's standardize this instead, well, we'd be doing the opposite of what we were talking about. We'd be creating another schooling system versus an educational organization that's around for sovereignty and freedom.
And that's going to be the message of the whole thing: is education is sovereignty. And those two values cannot be separated.
That's right.
If it's not encouraging your sovereignty, if it's not making you more sovereign, it's not education.
That's right. Agreed. That's the message.
So listen, Matt, I don't want to keep you any longer. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been a thrilling conversation. It's got the fires burning in me.
Yeah, good.
To an absolute honor to have you on. Where can people find you? Do you want to plug anything? Do you want to give everyone help spread the message that you believe in, that I believe in? Where can people find that?
I appreciate it. Head to the website, man, apogeestrong.com. You'll see everything we got going on, from the men's program, the women's program, all the campuses that are launching. We got 50 campuses launching here in 2024. Another probably close to 100 for 2025. We've got a few hundred home education families. All these verticals, these membership verticals can stand alone, or they go together. We just want options, man. We want you to see that you got options for help on how to be educated. So that's the best place to go. You can find, me, social media at Matt Beaudreau. Instagram is probably where I'm most active, but I'm glad to help. And if anybody is like, oof, I don't have kids, but I want to help, we've had a few of these people reach out. We've got a couple of 501c3 foundations as well, and not 100% of the money goes towards helping families. Tim and I don't take any money from that. It all goes to helping families to obtain this sovereignty. So
that's beautiful. And if you're listening and you want to empower yourself, take back control of your legacy, be more sovereign, raise sovereign children, then hear Matt's message, hear my message. Go to the links Matt just said, and you'll find the tools needed to do that. You won't find someone telling you what to do. You'll find the tools you need to do it, and someone to help you along the way. Thank you all for listening.